Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. Whatever time you're tuning in the program called What's Going on allpointstv.com. And we're coming to you again at 2 o'clock. We are here from 2 to 3 every Monday. And we have some very good news today, and that is that the program will be followed by the program called Satura's Black History Corner that comes on every second and fourth Mondays here at allpointstv.com. And they will be here at 3:30 sharp, staying around about 30 minutes. And they will be bringing you something refreshing, I'm sure, during their program. What we're going to be doing today is talking about two topics. One of which, of course, is the demonstration that occurred yesterday in Paris, where I understand 1.5 million plus people showed up at a demonstration to show solidarity with the fallen troopers, I guess you called them, the journalists that met a fate that was not intended, of course, by what they had done, but there was some flirting with death and what they did in their characterization of the Prophet of Islam, and we know what that can lead to based upon past practices. And we'll be talking about that during the first part of the program today, and we'll be talking about Selma, which I went to see this past weekend, and I'll give you some of the views that I have, at least on that as well. We'll be saying some things here on the demonstration, though nobody else is talking about, and we'll try to add a few things to it based upon some other perspectives that we bring to the discussion. And I think you'll find that these things are not being talked about anywhere else but at allpointstv.com. And we will try to give a different way of looking at it from the standpoint of what I published on Facebook yesterday, and I'll be continuing that discussion in another genre when I get out of the studio this afternoon. I'll be talking about some of the things that some are talking about around the shame of this president who was not there and didn't even send a high-level official to stand in for him, and that's a statement that's being made by this president, as we have not heard that statement very loudly being made in other cases as well. I think it's pretty clear now what we're dealing with in the White House, and I'll try to tie this together in terms of why this president was not there, and why only I wouldn't say a low-level representative, but how could you not have the ambassador of France there, Jane Hartley, who was appointed, I think she was appointed in June of 2014 and was confirmed by the Senate in September. Who, by the way, was one of the liaison officials in the Carter administration from 1978 to 1981 during that time period, and she was appointed as the ambassador to France and Monaco, and the person that was there before her was appointed, of course, to be the assistant attorney general of the United States, so serving under Eric Holder. And so you have how could she not be there at the event? She is the ambassador of France, and they have a dual ambassadorship in this case, and that's the ambassador of France and the ambassador of Monaco, a dual role that is played, and so she was there. But Holder, interestingly enough, who was in the country at the time on something that was put out as an anti-terrorism meeting that he had in France, was in the country but did not attend the affair. And I think that's based upon specific instructions of not to participate. I mean, the Secretary of State was not there. The President, of course, was not there. And nobody was appointed from the corridors of his administration from over here on these shores. Jane Hartley was already over there. And, of course, how would you justify her not being in attendance? So this morning when I got up and read the news, and everybody was talking about the shame and how they were embarrassed by the non-participation of this president, I don't know what the surprise, maybe shame, but I don't know what the surprise would be about. And there's enough shame to go around to a lot of other persons also, and that would be the ones that were there as well. And there's a different shame in their case than it was for this president. The shame of this president really is, I don't know how you can shame this president. Obama's non-participation is not clear as to whether or not he was playing the race card or the Islam card. I mean, nobody in France looks like his sons. I don't know if that's the reason why he was disengaged. What I think it really was more so was a non-engagement based upon his own Muslim tendencies. And I think everybody's clear about that by now. If not, they're not paying attention. Because we saw something that we began to kind of have a question about on June 4th, 2009, which was just 6 months into this president's term. And we had questions about what is he doing over there in terms of speaking in front of the persons that are assembled at the University of Al-Azhar, the oldest university on the continent of Africa, and really the oldest university in Islam, and inviting the Muslim Brotherhood and demanding that they be present, and that the 10 persons that were there be given front row seats at the event where he spoke directly to them pretty much in his talk, blaming the United States for all the things that have gone on, and their anger was at the West was directed for justifiable reasons because we were wrong in everything we did during the past. And we began to raise a question about what is going on here. And after 6 years of this genuflecting that we see has happened with this administration, where we've toppled all of our allies, and then France is an ally, and we're not participating in the demonstrations they had. Certainly, there's some shame that you could say that this country has in its non-participatory role, but there's shame in those who were there as well, and because their shame is that they went there to, in my estimation, to repeat a demonstration that occurred on October the 16th, 1995, in this country. You probably remember the Million Man March, where a Muslim leader of the Nation of Islam, Louis Farrakhan, called for 1 million black men to meet in the nation's capital to do the same thing they did pretty much in France. And I think that what they did in 95 was updated 20 years later to what we saw going on in Paris, where they met Neville Chamberlain-like to do the same thing there, a more politicized version of what they did there that had been done 20 years earlier on October the 16th, 1995, when they assembled there basically to protest their own behavior. And the demonstration yesterday was one estimate is 1.5 million persons showed up, and they had 40 leaders from different countries that were there protesting basically their own non-activity to stop this behavior by these Muslims who are, for example, Angela Merkel, who was there while she's over there in Paris. One of the newspapers in Germany had printed the cartoon that they went in there into the group called Charlie Hebdo, and I'll talk about that as well, where they went in there and pretty much eliminated the editorial staff of that particular newspaper that comes out weekly because of the satire they ran upon the prophet. And then while they're over there in Paris, she's over there in Paris, President Merkel of Germany, and while she's in Paris demonstrating because of the freedom of the press and all of that over there, then guess what happened over there in Germany while she was gone? That is, they went over there and bombed the place where they had repeated they put the cartoon in the paper over there, and that building was bombed while she's over there in Paris protesting.
I like to ask the left. They always pride themselves on being, the United States here, they always pride themselves on want to be inclusive and also being pluralistic and all this other stuff. And those very things that they advocate for are supposed to have, where criticism can be taken with a grain of salt. You can let it roll off your back. Now you got a group of people who are these radicalist Muslims, and I don't think all Muslims are the same, so I want to get that out of the way first. But you got these groups out there who just basically can't take a joke. They can't let it roll. I mean, you see horrific, cartoons in the press here attacking Christians, depicting popes or priests or ministers or anybody who believes is salacious and, and wicked and weird and perverse and all this. Mm-hmm. We just let it roll off our backs. It offends us, maybe. We just go on about our lives. But they got a group of people now in this inclusive, pluralistic society they're advocating for who go insane when somebody criticizes or mocks them. They have to grow a thicker skin if they're going to be in the West. But these people want to coddle these people. Mm-hmm. The left wants to coddle these people. And they should be all over this. They should be announcing this. This is the straw man that they've created attacking these other groups who oppose abortion or everything else. These people are by far more horrific, more potentially violent than the Army of God they rail about all the time for the anti-abortion group. Doing 2 murders in 40, 30 years since abortion has become an issue, 30-some years that it's been an issue in the United States. And nobody's condoning it. I don't hear any major mainstream Christian group going out there condoning these radicalist groups out there. Mm-hmm. But now, these people, the left should be all over anybody who steps out of line, does these horrific acts, instead of using the vehicles we have at our disposal, like through press, through the media and stuff like that, and attacking the very things that we allow for in a free society. The free press that's what it's supposed to be. Allow dissent, allow communication, see presentation of both sides. They don't want that. The Islamist radicalists don't want to see that. But the left is basically saying, okay, we got to go along with it because they're going to get upset. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, they're going to wonder at what time are they going to be expected to say, guess what? If you want to join the franchise of power, you also got to have the responsibility. You got to be on board with the responsibility of being a citizen of the West.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of wisdom in what you're saying, John. There's one part I think that I would have to clarify from my own position. And that is, we do say there's not all of them, it's not all Muslims, and yet when I write my pieces, I'm going to say Muslims, I'm not going to be saying radical Muslims, and I'm going to be saying it for this reason, is that in terms of the larger landscape, there is some disagreement within the house that Muslims are in, but let's go and narrow the focus down to the 2 driving forces of Islam, and that is the Quran and the Hadith. And when you begin to narrow it down to that particular point there, then all Muslims are on the same page. They're not all out there, in fact, flying planes in the buildings, and they're not all out there going into buildings like this particular building was on Wednesday, and then doing what they did there and leaving 12 people dead and some others in their wake. No, they're not all doing that. But when you narrow the focus down from all the things within the Islamic world where there is this disagreement, and some of the radical groups disagreeing with each other, I understand all of that as well. But I'm talking about when you narrow it down to what they do have in common. What they have in common is the Quran and the Hadith. And the question is, what do they call for? And when you start to look at it from that frame there, I think that the word radical Muslim, which is a modifier of the term, and the West is very good at using modifiers in terms of changing the very meaning what the word actually is. I don't modify the Islam because I don't see in Islam's history anything but the violence I'm seeing right now. And I see it starting in 622 when the Prophet comes out of Medina that he had run to. And when he went to Medina in 622, and he mobilized his forces, and then he came back. And I see what happens after that is over between 622 and the Prophet's death 10 years later in 632. I see nothing other than the sword being used by Islam. So this idea that it is a peaceful religion cannot be suborned by the evidence, and so that's how I think I would frame that.
Okay, see, somebody could take a random section of a book, and I've seen Muslims try to attempt to do this. They'll take a chapter, a verse out of the Bible, and say, "See, your religion calls for death too." Well, they're talking about this one master who got mad and he declared that everybody should be killed. It was in the book of Matthew, I think it was. It was in a story that Jesus relating to basically not how not to act, okay? And he was using that as that one spot. But the Quran does say if somebody's not a Muslim, you are called upon to kill him, If you allow them to live, then they're supposed to be subjected to taxation and willingly submit, not willingly, but show that there's some submission to you. That's what it says in the surahs and stuff. So I mean, it's in the book that they could do this stuff. So there's a greater flexibility there for what they're allowed to do compared to what we Christians are allowed to do.
Well, what I notice is that nobody is hijacking anybody else's religion. Anybody see any Mormons out there and having their religion hijacked, or in these other religions? And this question of, and I just saw this last night in one of the videos that was Hershey Ali, who is a convert from Islam, and of course she risked her head being cut off because once you are you profess a belief in you take the 13 words of the Muslim belief, there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger. Once you make that commitment, then you cannot get away from that commitment without having your life in jeopardy. No other religion does that. And so when I start seeing things like radical Islam and people saying, using the modified radical in Islam, I just think that that's inappropriate. And I only see one. I agree with those Muslims that say there's only one Islam. And I come back to narrow the frame from all the divisions that are in the Muslim movement and the Muslim, and I think it's a political movement more than, I mean, you can, well, okay, they say the religion is religion. But when I narrow it down to what the Muslims believe in, and what they believe in is what is in the Quran, I go to the Quran and find out what the beliefs are. And what the beliefs are there is what I see them being, what's being practiced. And Abbas, who was there yesterday, and Hollande telling Netanyahu not to show up, I think is an indication that he is actually recognizing that this is not some small group we're talking about. We're talking about the Islamic religion. And if it's just a small group, they've killed the 3 people who went into that arena. What is this? Why did they have all that force there at this demonstration? So I'm not buying that there is another Islam away from what we're saying being carried out there. Now it can be reformed to be something different. But what right now we're saying is Islam. And we cannot keep this pretense up that ISIS and is the Islamic State, or the ISIS, which is Islamic State in the in Iraq and the Levant, okay, ISIL. If you want to say and Hezbollah and Hamas, all of them under the umbrella of the Muslim Brotherhood, if you want to make the claim that they are not Islamic groups and religions being hijacked, then why aren't those that did not engage in the hijack and stand up and then oppose them? I don't see any opposition to what they're doing. I see a lot of tacit approval to it, and I approve that through what they did with Charlie Hebdo, the satirical paper that comes out once a week, is published on Wednesday, and they went in there and wiped out the editorial staff. They just wiped those persons out, and the French government. That's you, Hollande, that assigned the bodyguard that was assigned to that staff, the publisher of that paper. They were the first ones to be liquidated. They were the first ones to die. And so the government didn't take the full weight of what it had at its disposal to protect these persons, is now covering it up with this demonstration, without raising the question of why you're allowing the people in France to have these particular places where the authority of France cannot even go into places where they've set up Sharia law in France. So this demonstration was nothing other than, in my estimation, nothing other than a protest of their own behavior. It's shameful what they did yesterday, in my estimation.
You know what? Another thing is too, though, people think this is a recent development. This kind of the treatment of Christians. I'm going to the Syrian church now in the neighborhood, and I'm talking to people there who've been here in this country since the 1930s and 40s. Mm-hmm. And there's always tension between the Christians and the Muslims in those countries. Not as bad as they are now, mm-hmm. but they would always feed the Christian communities, especially in Iraq and Iran, would always have like this element of like they didn't know when they were going to just be randomly murdered by their Muslim neighbors. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like so that could happen. So I mean, it's just not a recent development, and so that's another thing is people trying to say it's like, well, it's because we do this, because we do that. The nature of religion is to be exclusive. I don't care what religion it is. I mean, there's Buddhists and Taoists are fighting against each other. I mean, in the historical past, China and other countries they were both present in. So I mean, it's like exclusivity. I mean, they want it. I mean, let's face it. I mean, how you change your people is to change your values, and that's a big bonus. That's the brass ring when you're vying for a soul of a culture.
Islam is a religion that exists back in the 7th century, and we have pretty much a stop of its advancement in the 10th century. When we ask the question of why is it that Islam, which is back there in the time period when it was making mathematical contributions, the compass and things like that, some of that being attributed to Islam, why is it that from the 10th century, well around the 11th century, since we're talking about 1000 AD, with the time of the Crusades starting in 1095, why is it that at that point we see a stopping of Islam in terms of any contribution made from that point up to the modern time? And the reason is because the static of looking in the Quran as a scripture to which really impedes anything else that goes on, because that is the landscape, and the idea is not to change anything, and that has got Islam stuck in the past. And so I just don't think we can abide by the. I think we're doing a lot of it out of fear too. I think we can't abide by this idea that there's a different Islam. And when I speak of Islam, and I'll be writing about this when I get back to my desk and write this piece today about the charade that went on yesterday, because I don't think we understand all the parameters of what really went on there. And I'm going to give you some background, hopefully, before we get off the air today about some things that happened before, because France is hyper hypocritical in this whole event. And I'm talking here about why they had the forming of the group called, the newspaper called Charlie Hebdo in the first place. And that goes back to some a lack of freedom of the press on the part of France. And they're out there talking about, this is about freedom of expression. They had shut it down. They had shut down a group that was a forerunner to the present group under this name right here back in 1970. And that would be when another group that was doing satire, that in 1970 they did a satire when Charles de Gaulle died. And they had a bombing that year where there was 146 people died, and the paper came out with a satire saying we had a major massacre here and one person died. And they were just making fun of Charles de Gaulle and saying that the focus was on his death and he wasn't deserving. And then what they did, what the French government did, they shut that paper down. And it's out of that suppression of the press, shut it down, by the way, and then out of that came the new group that did a sidebar move by changing his name and doing the same thing therein after that was over. But they shut that paper down under another name back there in 1970 when Charles de Gaulle died. And the fact is that this upheaval on the part of the Muslims, their outrage on the part of the Muslim population in France have been going on for 10 years, going back to 2005. They've been protesting what this group was doing, because it's a paper that deals with satire. And for them to have continued to come up with certain caricature images of the Prophet, they had demonstrations of the Muslims. These weren't the three people that went out there and did this carnage at that site. These people were out there in the street demonstrating against that, and they had police protection back there in 2005. And for 10 years, there's been ongoing threats being made against this this press. But France, you shut the forerunner to this group down, and that has not been talked about in the media. So there's nothing but hypocrisy as far as I'm concerned in terms of this demonstration. Now, I see a parallel to this demonstration to what Farrakhan did here in 1995. Some of the leaders were paying attention to it apparently, because what they did yesterday was call a meeting to protest their own lack of effort to shut this behavior down in Europe and around the rest of the world as well. This is not a response to it. When you go up there and start marching and everybody come together in one place To do what? And what was the substance of what was done there yesterday?
That's what I was going to wonder if I was being seeming too cynical or skeptical about that. I was like, oh, that's nice.
a
They join
non-response.
hands. To me, it's a symbolic gesture. Okay, you think the radicalists are going to say, gee, they're showing this great unity. I'm going to change my ways from now, and then join hands and sing songs to them? I mean, I don't understand what the purpose of that is. I don't.
Hezbollah, the Muslim Brotherhood, ISIS, ISIL, Hamas, all these groups are laughing at them because they understand that this is nothing other than another form and another way in which you surrender. For example, in my post yesterday, I said that if you want to take concrete action, let me give you two things you can do. One of them is to say that anyone who stands with the notion that there are certain places in France and in London, England, or other parts of England, or in Germany, or any other Western country, and say that there is a place where Sharia law will prevail over and above the national laws of the country, anyone who promotes that idea will be deported. They're not going to do that because they're not serious. But yet there are places in France, I understand there are 750 different places in France that the French police dare not go into. And how many people are aware that when this incident occurred, French police showed up on the scene and they were disarmed and had to leave the scene because they had been disarmed and they could not go up against those AK-47s that these guys brought to the scene of that carnage.
Okay, can I ask a question? Okay, because you're a person of history. You know the African continent really well, and you know about the history of Africa. What role do you think that actually? My thinking is basically France having been a colonial power, large members of the large portion of their colonies resting in African nations like Algeria. Some people are basically saying this is just a simple case of the chickens coming home to roost. They have these people who have been dumped on by the French people. Now they're in the homeland of the French people, and they're going to give back as much as they got. So they're basically the French people deserve what they're getting with this. But I've also talked to people who are from the former French colonies, who are indigenous people, all those colonies, and they say they much prefer the French ruling over them than they did the people from their own locales.
I've been to African countries where I've been in meetings, as a matter of fact, in some African countries, and they're saying that they wish they would come back. But the best book I read on the French colonization would be the book written by the person from Martinique that was in Algeria during the war in Algeria, Frantz Fanon, who has a good book out, the late Frantz Fanon has a good book out called Dying Colonialism. And he talks about the colonialism in Algeria. And this idea, you see, it's always the West's fault. This idea that whenever somebody rises up against the West, then there's something the West did to provoke the animosity that's being shown toward the West. Is always something the West did. And when they talk about colonialism, they act like colonialism when they just grabbed everything and put nothing into place of that which you were grabbing. It was just a grab. It was a grab bag site. Everywhere they went, they started grabbing and put nothing in its place. And that's the going rate. It's something the West did, and they're angry about it. And that's what they're doing right now, retribution and things of that sort. And none of that can be tested through the historical record. I'll give you one example in terms of Ghana. Before Kwame Nkrumah took over Ghana in 1957, I haven't been educated here, by the way, between 1935 and 1945, and had picked up some of the Pan-African ideas over here in this country. The idea that all the Africans going to be Pan-Africans. That is, everybody. Pan-American means all. It goes to all Americans. Pan-African means all the black people in the world, sprinkled around the world. They're going to be in this. They're all African people. So Nkrumah carries that idea back to the continent of Africa. Nobody on the continent understood it, but he had the idea, having been under the umbrella of some of the westernized, people who never been to Africa, think that they can tell Africa how to do his own business. So he took their noise and took it back there to Ghana. And so in 1954, the British decided they're going to pull out, gave them 3 years to get their house in order, and we're going to pull the British out of Ghana. They have a great coronation, and Nkrumah going to be installed in 1957, but you got 3 years to get ready for it. They had $400 million of credit in the bank when the British pulled out. And then once they pulled out, Nkrumah got in there and wasted all the money that was in the treasury at that point, going to try to organize all Africa now, spending the resources of Ghana, and going to have this Pan-Africanism spread throughout Africa, and before you knew it, Ghana is broke. And they and so now they want to confiscate all the cocoa money, and now the farmers are doing sidebar, black market, and things like that. Put the country in shambles.
You know what I think is ironic? Is these people who come to the West and get educated, they gravitate towards Marxism, which basically frames the whole entire world in Western eyes. Mm-hmm. I mean, Western conceptions, Western, based on the West. Then they want to jettison all that, keep all this other stuff, and then basically wonder why it doesn't work in their society. I mean, it's because they themselves, they're dealing with it because they experience it through the eyes of the Western presenters. Mm-hmm. And they embrace that, but in the reality, when you take that back to Africa or whatever it is, it's not going to wash. It doesn't work. They don't. The people there don't see the world through those lenses. Mm-hmm. And that's like a phenomenological approach to psychology. Like Hillary Clinton, like we said earlier, I was talking earlier to you before the show started. Hillary Clinton did have a valid point. You got to find out what's in the minds of your enemies, because that way you got to be able to find. But here I advocate for a more dark and sinister thing. Find out what their fears are and play on them. Not trying to become. I mean, if you're going to, because let's face it, we've already tried the diplomatic route with and that's not working. So we got to find out what really terrifies them and become that boogeyman.
We're going. If you're going to defeat this enemy, you're going to have to understand how this enemy thinks. That's what Brigitte Gabriel is trying to say here. This idea that you're going to sweet talk these people out of their resistance. You've not won the war just because you go over there and you kill some of the leadership and things like that. No war has ever been won unless you break the will of your opponent, and they have not done that yet. These people, in fact, look for martyrdom. And I don't know if you noticed this when these persons were cornered, the ones who went and did that carnage at Charlie Hebdo. I don't know if you noticed that they were cornered and they were saying that they want martyrdom. In other words, they were seeking death because they felt they were representing Islam, and they were seeking martyrdom because the idea is that if you are a martyr, you go immediately into paradise. You don't have to wait for it. It's just boom, and then you're back and you're now in paradise in the next instant. So they seek that. And when you have an enemy like that, what is happening in the West is that they have never seen an enemy quite like this enemy they're confronting right now. Well, a little bit in World War II with the kamikaze persons out of Japan, but they have never seen this type of Nazification of the enemy, where he has this kind of intent, malevolent intent, and willing to martyr himself for a concept that the West can't understand, where you have a death cult here. And it frightens the West. If it doesn't frighten the West, why is it that when you had 9/11, when we had lost 3,000 people on that date, with 4 airplanes being hijacked by 19 people, 15 of them from Saudi Arabia, which is supposed to be one of our allies, and if we have allies like this, we don't need any enemies. That's what Robert Spencer is trying to say. And one of the more clear thinkers out here that understands what is happening here. And we need to be aware of those kinds of persons that are speaking clearly about what is we're facing. But after 9/11, Bush ran back to Washington after having hid out for a period of time. Didn't know what was going on, so he hid him at one of the forts. And then he went back to Washington, decided, why am I hiding out? And we have all this firepower. Let me go to Washington and begin to reconstitute what's going on here. But he ran to the mosque, and then he wanted to tell everybody that was in hearing distance, where it could be heard around the world, that he's not blaming Islam, and said in the midst of 3,000 persons being killed, 3 buildings being knocked down, we've lost 3,000 American lives, and 19 people committed suicide on those planes and took all the ones on the planes with them. 1 plane going down in Pennsylvania, 1 flown into the Pentagon, and 2 in New York, and then people are going to try to say that this was done by an inside job. Give me a break. This is nothing but cowardice. Those 19 persons hijacked those planes, carried those planes into those buildings, and martyred themselves because of the belief in Islam.
You see, actually, I wouldn't put it past our government to state something like that. I disagree with you on that.
Well, did you see Bush? Okay.
I wouldn't put it past our government to do that.
Did you see Bush's response, though? When they went into that room and told him, Mr. President, it was the first plane. So, Mr. President, we've had a plane that hit the Trade Center. And the president was a little stunned. But when they came, it wasn't clear. It seemed like when the plane might have been flying low and could have been anything. But then they went back to him and said, Mr. President, whispered in his ear and told him, Mr. President, there's been a second plane that hit another building. At that point, he knows we are at war.
See, the first thing I heard from was my girlfriend called me I was dating this girl, and she called me at the time, and she said, the Pentagon was on fire. Well, that's an older building. I said, well, that could be anything. Mm-hmm. Well, then she called me about the two planes, smashing into the World Trade Centers. It still didn't sink in. And my friends and I have always been talking about the worst case scenarios. We knew that we're going to be attacked at some point. The World Trade Centers were bombed a few years during the Clinton administration, the Clinton years, and it was like, it was a lukewarm response. They might have done some stuff in place, but nothing really significant. They didn't want to make a big deal of it. They didn't want to overreact. But when it started dawning on us, and when more reports coming in, I was like, you hate to be right about something like this. And people think my friends and I were high-fiving. We weren't. We knew it was going to be attacked. Mm-hmm. We just knew it was a matter of time. That was all it.
Yeah.
And when I realized, it's like, all my friends and I called each other up at different points and said, holy crap, we were right. This is going to happen. We didn't know how it was going to happen, but we knew there was going to be some terrorist attack.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of with Meatloaf on this one. Meatloaf has a song out where it says, "I'll do anything for love, but I won't do that." I think I interpret that song to be that he'll do pretty much anything for this person that he's in love with, but he won't do what was being requested of him by the person he was in love with. And it seemed like that was about taking her husband out. I mean, what was he talking about in that song, John? I'll do anything for love, but I won't do that. Okay, well, anyway, I think the government is basically a bunch of psychopaths, sociopaths, corrupt individuals, all of that. But no, they didn't do that. In other words, I'm not putting anything past the government that they're capable of doing tremendously foul things. And when you tear the Constitution up, I don't have any confidence that you are a lawful person and will do lawful things. But they did not do that. They didn't get on those planes and fly them into those buildings. And there's only one religion that is doing that. And I'm not going to excuse them for it. I'm not going to sneak back into the shadows where the cowardice that was shown yesterday in Paris, where they went in there to endorse where they actually had a protest against their own hypocrisy. They were actually demonstrating against their own win.
But it made people feel good. They hugged everybody and kissed everybody.
They did.
And everybody was so happy. And it's like a Band-Aid on an artery being open.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it.
I mean, they hid in numbers. They hid their cowardice in numbers of 1.5 million or so persons that met in Paris. And they have, they say there's a power in numbers. Well, there was no power in those numbers. Did they come out and say then we're going to take this energy that we have and we're going to focus upon the problem? Let me hear you say this, Francois Hollande. Let me hear you say this, that you're going to take France back. You're not going to concede anything to Sharia law in a country where you have your own national laws. Are you going to say that? Or are you going to continue this cowardice of walking up and down the streets? You didn't even want Benjamin Netanyahu to show up because that might have inflamed the Muslims that were there. Now, he's not the radical Muslims. These are just the Muslims. And you were afraid of inflaming them. Well, what is that about if you're going to claim radical Muslim, but you're trying not to stir up? And they're saying things like this right here. They're saying that they're sleeper cells. Well, how can that be? You got to be kidding me. How can there be sleeper cells if the radicals are not Muslims? See, look. People, the Muslim, I heard these imams in Paris. As soon as Wednesday hit, the imams come out and say that the people that did that hijacked our religion. Okay, fine. That's what you said, right? Tell me how you do that. I mean, do you put it? Do you go to the mosque, put it in your hands, on your back, or put it on an airplane? You can't hijack a religion. You hijack something that has materiality. You can hijack planes. You so.
Let's face it. Somebody could go so far with a lot of Muslims. They say, "Wait a minute, time out here. That's not what we meant by that. We use this as an allegory." But let's face it. The book says to do this. I mean, if you just want to keep on, I mean, they keep on saying it's in the book. It's in the book. What's in the book? Okay. I mean, and it's like anybody wants to say it doesn't say that. How do you reconcile this? Well, then they'll try to explain, well, this certain group interprets it this way. This interpreter group says not to do this because that's a little too extreme, but the book says to do it, all right? So,
John, nobody's hijacking anything else, but every time somebody goes out there and act in the name of Islam, all of a sudden there's a hijacking that has occurred. Now, we don't hear nothing about the hijacking until they go out there and do something that gets all the other Muslims, they're looking at them with a jaundiced eye. And then all of a sudden there's a hijacking that goes on. All the moms come out as if they're not teaching this in the mosque. And so the religion's been hijacked. Well, nobody's hijacking Buddhism. I don't hear anybody claiming that they hijacked anything in the Mormon church. No Baptist religion's being hijacked. Why is everybody picking on these Muslims?
yeah, I'd like to know this. Okay, if the Muslim does what they're Muslim supposed to do according to the Quran, they're scary people. Now, the person who is a Christian, he puts it upon him or herself to to avoid sex before marriage, not to have like a sullied life. All that stuff that's negative or possibility or something that's actually a sort of a sacrifice, it's on them. Okay? If they're just following what is taught in the New Testament, that's all they're following. If to be a good Muslim means to follow the Quran, means you couldn't be getting along with anybody else outside of your group because you'd have to either enslave them, conquer them, or put them in chains somehow. You couldn't let them live a life. Because everything they're going to do is, if they don't become a Muslim, that's an offense to you and to your prophet. Christianity says, if somebody doesn't accept your words, Christ said this. Now, Christians have butchered people, but they're in violation of their own scripture. It says, if somebody doesn't accept your words, shake the dust off your feet and walk away from them, because God will judge them as greater. It doesn't say go back with your friends with swords and force them to convert to Christianity. Now, it's been done. But it was in a violation of the teachings of Christ himself. Keep on going back to the teachings of Christ. He says nothing like the prophet, on the other hand, says to do this. So there is no comparison. Now, they say that the abuses have happened in Christianity. That's a problem with us people on the right. We admit things happen. The left totally ignores it and tries to justify it if they even will come close to admitting to it.
And putting the country in behind the eight ball and putting it in jeopardy by its denial of reality. And making all this noise about things that have nothing to do with what we are facing. We can't even identify what it is we're facing with this enemy. And we got to start talking in very specific terms about what it is that is going on here, and stop with this modifying these things that are happening and putting modifiers in front of it, such as and we do it all the time with things like political correctness. What is that? What is political correctness? And these other modifiers that we use in terms of trying to, where you modify it out of existence. So the meaning of it, or what it would mean if you didn't have the modifier there, you modify it out of existence, so it means something else. You can't be correct and be politically correct, because political correctness is a modifier, makes the correctness a lie. And so we have this radical Islam as a way of in a way toning down the echo of our own fears. And we are modifying it because we are fearful of what it is we're facing here. And yet, this I don't want to call him out of his name, but I have some things in my mind that I wish if I wasn't talking to a family on a family network, I would use some other choice words. But there's nothing but cowardice on Francois Hollander's point. This man is not serious. He's up here talking about this was radical Islam, and yet he's playing footsie with all the people who are practitioners of Islam and get them their own areas. I think 750 is the last count of the areas that they have in France where it is under Sharia law, and there are places in France right now that the French can't go into in their own country. And for us to say things like this religion is being hijacked, and the people are saying that they were upset because of the way in which they caricatured the Prophet of Islam, how can a non-practitioner of Islam be offended by the prophet being characterized in a certain way, which they find offensive. That's what Islam does. And to say that this is about it being hijacked by those who are not practitioners, why would non-practitioners of Islam be offended? How many Mormons are offended by the characterization? I don't think any of them are. And it would be ridiculous for them to claim that they be offended. Because you're not a practitioner, why would you be offended? And yet they're trying to say those who are offended are not practitioners. I mean, this is ridiculous.
Another thing is too. It's like
West believes that.
okay, I'm supposed to. Okay, we got a culture here now. It's like really largely like a lot of atheists and all that. And I'm supposed to be cognizant of that and not mention faith things because I'm a Christian. But it's okay if Muslims want to force almost basically their religion becomes secular law once they get large enough numbers. The left here, who's always decrying the blurring of the lines of separation of church and state, but they are okay with the Muslims basically pushing their agenda down our throats, their religious agenda.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not going to let them push anything past me. I see exactly what's going on. I saw that march yesterday, and nothing but an act of cowardice. We had 1.5 million persons out there in the street, and each one was encouraging their own hypocrisy. And what they really were protesting was they were out there protesting their own win, because there was nothing of substance that was out there. And Obama wasn't there, but his hypocrisy was different from the hypocrisy of those who were there. Everybody's talking about Obama, how ashamed they were. Obama didn't show up, and they only had Jane Hartley that was there as ambassador of France and Monaco. She became the ambassador in September of last year, after the person that was ambassador of France became the assistant under Eric Holder. And so now they got Jane Hartley over there. She's the only one there was in official capacity, although Eric Holder was in the country at the time but did not attend the event. I guess he was too busy to do so. And Obama was not going to show up. But we don't, and on the question with Obama, and they talk about how it was a shame he wasn't there, I don't know if he didn't show up because the people that were killed didn't look like Trayvon Martin, which would therefore be the race card, or was it because of his affiliation and obvious tendencies to be pro-Muslim? And there's no doubt about that, because this president said in front of the United Nations that the future does not belong to anyone who defames a prophet. That to me portends that this president foresees in the future the caliphate, which is what these Muslims are trying to bring about, and they're doing where they are. What's happening in France, really, and this is what Mark Steiner's writing about in his book called America Alone. And he has on the front cover of the book, if you have not seen it, a globe, which is a map of the entire world, and he has Islamic flags all over the globe except one place, and that's the United States. He's saying that U.S. will be alone. And the reason for that is because they're looking at the demographics in Europe. And I can tell you right now, if the demographics in Europe do not change, then Europe is already gone. Because what Islam does, having taken a page from the prophet of Islam, who went away from Mecca fled there in 622, which is the first date on the Muslim calendar, 1 AH, the flight. I wish Malcolm X, which I'll be talking about next month when we have the 5th anniversary of Malcolm X's assassination. Malcolm claimed to be a Muslim, but if he had been a Muslim and he had understood the flight, which is a tenet of Islam, he would have run from his killers and lived to fight another day. He did not do that. He stood there in front of the killers, knew they were in that room, and stood there in front of them and got 16 bullets in his chest. But that's not what the prophet did. The prophet went to Medina in 622 and came back once he got his forces in place and came back. And that's what Islam does. It goes into the places there, and they simply incubate themselves on the soil. So what you have in France, this is what Mr. Halanda, y'all were demonstrating yesterday. Here's what you have in France. You have the Muslims going into the places, mimicking the prophet in 622, who fled and came back with his entourage, and they put the Islam right there where they had fled from. They're now immigrating into places there and growing Islam on the soil. And that's why Europe is lost, because Europe doesn't have the gall to tell them to get out. Here's what I would say. I mean, if you're serious, here's what I would say. Anyone that sets up a place in a country that has its own laws, and you say that you're going to have Sharia law like you have in Dearborn, you got it here too. and you got Sharia law. I will tell you this: you to get out. And I will tell the Muslims also, for you to come into the West, fleeing from the places that you left, and you're going to set the place that you left because you did not like the quality of life where you left from, and you come here to the West to set up a place similar to the place that you in fact disavowed your association with by leaving it, and then set it up over here. I will tell you this: if you do that over here, to get out. But they're not going to do that. And by not being forceful, want to demonstrate, which is their hypocrisy, they are actually ensuring the fall of the West, and that is going to be certain. That's why Mark Stein has that book out called America Alone. America Will Be Alone. And it's only because in this country, where you have 2% of the country right now Muslim, in France it's 10%. And they're saying, what, 25? In fact, Muslims are already saying this out in the open. They're saying that it won't be but just a matter of time when the Muslims will outnumber the people in France. And that's already on the way. Everybody knows France is gone. Holland not going to do anything about it except march and demonstrate. Those guys that were out there yesterday, every last one of them, nothing but a coward. And I know that impresses you. But I was not impressed with it. All I saw was out there cowardice. People out there trying to act like they were doing something, were doing nothing. Let me see Hollande take the steps to shut that stuff down in France. And if he doesn't shut it down, I can tell you right now, France is on its way right now to be an Islamic state. And so is England under David Cameron. He's another coward. I mean, these people are sickening. And those of you who have not understood what's going on here, just keep waiting and watching, because you're going to see a caliphate in Europe, and it's well underway right now with this fleckless, weak-kneed, kowtowed down leadership in all of his leaders. And that's David Cameron, and before him there was this other guy, Brown, and this other Moran they had before him. They all are out there doing the same thing. And none of them are serious about confronting this enemy. And you're not going to confront it either with your political correct noise, radical Islam. What is that? I want somebody to define to me what is that. What I want to do with those who talk about radical Islam, I want to put that. See, I'm going to be very frank. I'm very direct. Direct in what I don't bite my tongue. I have to be direct. That's all I know. I'm direct. So those of you that say that there's such a thing as radical Islam, I tell you what I want to do. I want you to define what radical Islam is, and I want to put that next to Islam. I want to compare radical Islam to Islam so I can ferret out, since you're not able to do it for me, I want to ferret out what is the difference. And I'll tell you right now, there is no difference. That's your putting a modifier on the word because you're frightened by what you're looking at. And you cannot defeat this enemy by in fact doing that. They're laughing at the West. That junk they had going over there yesterday where they had 40 leaders out there locking arms like they're in fact some demonstration. They should have sang Kumbaya or We Shall Overcome someday and just kind of march like they did back there trying to confront the laws of the South in this country. Because it really was nothing but noise being made by these leaders that are afraid of Islam. They're afraid of what they're looking at. And this is a frightening proposition here because the West does not intend to stand up to it. And therefore, what yesterday's march was about was a non-vocal expression of the West's surrender. That's what that was about yesterday. The West has actually capitulated. And the capitulation was not in the words. Let me tell you what the capitulation is. The capitulation is in the modifier. You understand that? It's in your modifier. You can hear the capitulation in your modifier. Radical Islam. You see, you're capitulating in the words you're using. It's in your modifiers your capitulation can be heard. And they hear it very well in the Middle East. And so do I. And I'll be writing about this when I get back. Because even though you can't hear yourself, see, you don't hear yourself. I hear you very well. And you have capitulated. You have surrendered. Now, you would never say that that's what you were doing yesterday. That's exactly what you were doing. And your capitulation is clear. Because you're not serious about fighting this battle. Because you don't want to face this foe. Trying to act like this is some small group that the other people do not agree. They'll come out there and tell you, these imams came out and said that their religion had been hijacked. Nobody hijacked nothing else. And people believe that because they want to believe it. Ain't nothing being hijacked here. You can't take something. You can't take some a non-inanimate object and put it. How do you hijack? Tell me how you hijack a religion. You go into the mosque and you hear the imam speaking, and then you then take. Let me say this then. Let me make this point. If you hijack the religion, then let me just say this. If you hijack my money, you know what that means? I can't go to the store and spend it. You know why? Because you got it. So if you hijack a religion, then yesterday was Sunday. Okay, they had a mosque there. Did the imams go into the mosque yesterday? Now, the hijacking occurred on Wednesday. Did they go into the mosque yesterday and teach the Quran yesterday? They did, didn't they? Okay. Then what was hijacked? I wait for that. What was hijacked? Can anybody tell me what was hijacked? I mean, if you hijack my money and you got it and I don't have it, I can't spend it, right? We all agree with that? Okay, fine. Okay, then you hijack this religion. And the imam said it now, so we know that's true because they said it. They came out and said Wednesday, these persons hijacked our religion, okay? Did the imams having the religion hijacked, did they go into the temple yesterday, into the mosque yesterday, and teach Islam? That's what I thought. Nothing was hijacked. And you might as well get off that right now because Moss ain't buying it. And if you were not so scared of the proposition, you wouldn't be buying it either. Nonsense. They say these things every time they have something comes up, and it wasn't us, it wasn't our religion. These guys are taking it over, and look what they're doing with it. I've never seen a religion that has so many hijackers in it. In fact, wherever Islam goes, guess what's happening? Trailing behind them are the hijackers. I mean, this is laughable. And your fears are coming up, and I see your fears through that which you modify in the words that you use here. I don't talk about radical Islam. And when I write about it today, you won't see radical nowhere in my presentation or what I'll be writing on Facebook, other than to talk about the modification that you use. I don't use modifiers. The problem that we have here is Islam. And until we recognize that, the problem can't be dealt with because the West is, in fact, doing these sidebar conversations when they're speaking very directly to you. And they're telling you that their intent is to, in fact, bring a caliphate. And they're saying this. They're saying that they're going to have the Muslim flag flying at some point in time over the nation's capital. They're saying that. And they mean every word of it. And they have all the time in the world to bring it about. They have the patience of Job. And the West has the denial of all the 1.5 million persons out there, plus the other person denying it, acting like everybody in the West denies it, acting like there's nothing to see here other than these few people out here doing bad things under the umbrella of a single religion, not doing under any other umbrella. Nobody else got as hijackers, and people want to believe that out of their own fears. Until we get together with each other for a reason of stopping that which is threatening the West, then they won. And the surrender was announced yesterday. And if that's going to be the continuation of how we behave there, then that would be the ultimate fate of what happens in the West. Okay, folks, next week when we come together, I want to talk about Selma because I got to go into that because I went and saw the movie Saturday. And I got to tell you about the discussion that came in after that was over. We'll talk about that next week when we have more time. Until next week, I want you to follow your dream. Don't forget, following this program at 3:30, staying around for about 30 minutes, will be Satori's Black History Corner. And I have to rush out of here to go and see it live. Be here at 3:30, right here at this network called allpointstv.com. Want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.